The helmet was dented on the left side from a pavement impact 18 months ago. Cal had buffed the scratches down to where you could almost miss them, but the dent was structural, the kind of damage that tells a story about impact force and recovery angle rather than vanity. He wore it because he rode, and he rode because Nora had asked him once why he always took the back roads home. And he had said he needed the air, and she had looked at him the way she looked at everything, which was directly and without decoration. And she had said, okay. As if she'd been doing the same thing herself for years and had only now found the right word for it. He locked the motorcycle in the Haverfield Executive Terminal lot at 6:38 a.m. and carried the helmet inside because the lot was public and the lock on the clasp was old. He wore his riding gear-worn jacket, scuffed boots, the tool bag over one shoulder because he had come straight from the school drop-off, and the inspection was at Gate 7. And the aircraft wasn't going anywhere for another hour and 7 minutes. He did not know that Maren Voss was already inside the terminal. He did not know she was the woman whose signature was on the ownership documents for the aircraft at Gate 7, or that she was in the executive lounge with her coffee watching every person who came through the glass doors with the practiced assessment of someone who had been reading rooms since before she had the vocabulary to name what she was doing. She read Cal Reyes in the time it takes to set down a cup of coffee. She looked at the helmet. She looked at the jacket. She looked at the tool bag. She assigned a category and moved on. She was wrong about what she was looking at in a way that would take her 3 days to fully understand. Outside, on the tarmac, in the maintenance hangar 30 yards past the Gate 7 boarding apron, the aircraft she had come to board sat in its cradle under inspection lights. Every structural decision in that airframe, every load path, every composite layer sequence, every tolerance in every panel had been made by the man now crossing her executive lounge in a dented helmet and boots she had already dismissed. Cal's morning had started at 5:10, which was when Nora decided she had opinions about scrambled eggs that hadn't been previously established and needed to be established now. She was 8, with a gap in her front teeth that had been there since November, and which she referred to as her thinking space, and she wore a titanium washer on a leather cord at her collarbone, had worn it since she was 5. When Cal had come home from the FA certification flight of the first airframe he had designed from first principles, and she had asked him what made airplanes stay up, and he had said, thousands of small decisions, all of them right, starting with parts small enough to hold in your hand. He had given her the washer from the primary fastening sequence. She had put it on without ceremony and had not taken it off since, including during a swimming meet in March that had produced a conversation with a lifeguard Cal had not been there for, but had heard about in significant detail. He rode her to school on the motorcycle, her in her own helmet, undented, which she mentioned with satisfaction, and watched her go through the front doors with the purposeful efficiency of someone who has already decided how the day will go and is simply proceeding. Then he rode to Haverfield. On his workbench before he'd left sat a number that had been living behind his eyes for 3 weeks, $9 million, and 7 days to the 23rd. The debt call had arrived filed by a Nevada entity called Lodestar Capital Management, whose registered address was a mail forwarding service in Henderson. The entity held a note against Reyes Aerospace Systems that had been assigned from the original lender without notification, which Cal had spent 11 days with his attorney learning was legal in ways that did not feel like they should be. The note was real. The debt was real. If the $9 million wasn't retired by the 23rd, the collateral was forfeit, 23 active FA certified design, a designee engineering authorization, and the aeronautical data library that underpinned every aircraft his firm had ever certified for flight. 30 engineers. 12 years. Nora's drawings on the workshop wall planes, mostly with dimensions that were sometimes correct. On the drafting table beside the debt paperwork sat the Starrett master precision level that had belonged to the engineer who taught him structural load analysis before any university had a chance to complicate what that man knew in his hands. Cal had bought it at an estate sale the year he started the firm and had used it on every significant project since. He did not display it. He worked with it. He had known since March who owned Lodestar. He had known since March why the entity had been created and why the timing was designed to intersect with the 23rd specifically. He had been patient because the evidence needed to survive what it would face when it was used. He came to Haverfield because the Meridian 7 at Gate 7 required a pre-departure structural inspection sign-off, and he was the engineer of record on the type certificate, and the type certificate meant his responsibility did not end when the aircraft left the manufacturing line. He had designed every dimension of that airframe. 2 years ago he had discovered, in archive procurement records, a composite material substitution in the aft panel of production lot 7, a substitution that had passed static testing and failed under cyclic aerodynamic load at altitude. He had filed a sealed report with the FAA Aviation Safety Criminal Investigation Office. He had been building the complete evidentiary record ever since. The aircraft at Gate 7 was a different lot. It was cleared. He walked it anyway, because the design engineer who stops walking the aircraft stops understanding it. He parked his motorcycle. He carried his helmet inside. He went to work. Maren Voss's morning had begun at 6:30 with the signature that completed an 11-week acquisition. She had been building the Helix Aviation purchase since February maintenance contracts, airworthiness authorization chains. The particular legal architecture that meant Helix's 6 Falcon series aircraft would be unable to fly the moment the ink was dry, because their maintenance pathway ran through a provider she now controlled. She signed at 6:32. By 7 o'clock, the Helix operations director had been notified. She did not take satisfaction in these moments the way some people expected her to. She simply moved to the next thing on the list. What Maren Voss's money had not touched was a question she had stopped asking out loud. Her husband Marcus had died 3 years ago in an in-flight incident over the Rockies, aboard a Meridian 7, at cruising altitude. The NTSB had found evidence of aft structural anomaly. The investigation had listed the cause as material nonconformance in a specific production lot. No party had been named. The investigation had been closed. Her counsel had advised her against reviewing the FAA's follow-on sealed reports, while she maintained a litigation interest in the manufacturer. And she had followed that advice, and she had told herself this was prudence and not something else. She flew on Meridian 7s. She had made this decision deliberately, 3 months after Marcus died. She was not going to become a person who could not. She arrived at Haverfield at 6:30 and positioned herself in the executive lounge and watched the terminal through glass, which was what she did in airports she watched. Because watching was information, and information was the thing she trusted. She watched the man in the riding gear come through the glass doors and she catalogued him. Helmet, tool bag, jacket with a worn elbow, work boots without shine. She made her assessment. She returned to her coffee. She did not think about him again until she walked out onto the boarding apron 20 minutes later and found him kneeling at the aft section of her aircraft with one hand flat on the fuselage panel and his tablet set aside entirely. The walk-around took Cal 12 minutes. He started at the nose, worked the leading edges port and starboard in the low morning light coming off the tarmac. Moved aft along the fuselage, checking the access panels in the sequence he had memorized before the aircraft ever flew. Not because he was required to work this way, but because the sequence was his, and deviating from it was a way of trusting the previous inspection rather than doing a new one. At panel 22B in the port aft section, he stopped. He was wearing inspection gloves. He ran his fingers along the panel seam at a specific angle, not looking at his hand, just reading the surface, and he felt it. A differential in compression resistance 7 inches from the forward fastener. The composite under a load it wasn't distributing as designed, redistributing stress in a pattern that preceded visible fracture by 8 to 12 flight cycles. He stood. He marked the location. He opened the maintenance log on his tablet, panel 22B, port aft, stress distribution deviation at reference J7, non-flight critical at current load profile, recommend inspection prior to next scheduled departure. He was walking back toward the terminal when the lounge door opened, and Marin came out onto the apron. She wore a cashmere coat and moved the way she moved everywhere, which was as if the destination had already been determined, and she was simply fulfilling the plan. She stopped when she saw him. She looked at the tool bag. She looked at the tab. She said, "My charter coordinator indicated all pre-departure documentation had been completed and cleared prior to arrival. I was given to understand the aircraft was ready." She paused. "Are you the additional maintenance crew?" "Pre-departure inspection," he said. "I need 5 minutes to finish the documentation." She looked at the helmet tucked under his arm. "What happened to pavement?" She studied him with the expression of someone whose schedule runs in 15-minute increments. "My departure is at 7:45. I know. You have time." She started to say something about the charter timeline. He had already turned back toward the aircraft. She watched him kneel at the port aft section and place his hand flat on the panel without looking at his tablet. 4 seconds. He stood. He made a note. He stood still looking at the tail. Then he came back toward the operations desk and opened his tool bag to retrieve a documentation form, and she saw clipped to the interior pocket a laminated FA Engineering Designee Authorization Badge. Green border, type Certificate Authority. The specific classification she had spent enough years in aviation acquisition to recognize as belonging only to design engineers with full airframe certification rights. Not maintenance, not inspection. She looked at it for 1 second longer than she meant to. She said, "Is something wrong with the aircraft?" He looked at her. "There's a panel that needs monitoring. It's documented. The aircraft is within its operating parameters for this flight." "Within its parameters," she said. "Yes, that's what engineers say when they mean barely." He looked at her for a moment. "It means within its parameters," he said. "Barely is a different word." She started a reply. She stopped. "Without deciding to," she said. "How did you know that panel specifically?" He looked at the aircraft, not appraising it from the outside, she realized, but accounting for it from the inside, the way a person looks at something they built rather than something they purchased. "I've worked on this type for a long time," he said. He left it there. She walked back inside with his unanswered question following her through the glass doors, and she could not have said why she was still thinking about the way his hand had been flat on the panel still. Patient. Reading. She found the child 20 minutes later at the end of the wrong corridor, or the right one. A girl of 8 was sitting at a table in the crew lounge, with a book and a pencil and a titanium washer on a leather cord that she touched with one finger periodically. The way people touch things they trust absolutely. The girl looked up. She assessed Marin without any of the social architecture adults use to disguise assessment. "Are you the one flying on Dad's plane?" she said. Marin stopped. "I'm not sure, there's been a miscommunication. Your father appears to be part of the maintenance staff. The aircraft design would have been handled by the manufacturer's engineering team." Nora considered this with the patience of someone giving a factual error time to correct itself. "He designs them," she said. "He just also checks them after." She returned to her book. He says the people who design things and then stop checking them don't actually believe in what they built. Marin looked at the washer. What is that? Nora held it out, not offering it, showing it. Titanium washer, from the first plane Dad certified. He said it's the part that keeps everything else together. She let it rest back against her collarbone. Some people think it's strange that I still wear it. But my teacher says the things worth keeping always seem strange until you understand why. Marin crouched slightly to see it better. The washer was precise and small and clearly functional, not decorative in any way. Not designed to be worn anyway, because it meant something exact. How long have you had it? Since I was 5, Nora said. I'm Nora. Nora nodded with the equanimity of someone for whom this information was interesting but not surprising. She looked at Marin's face the way she looked at instrument panels, which was to read what was actually there, rather than what she expected. You've been waiting for something, she said. Not a question. Not like waiting in an airport, like waiting for something you've been afraid to find out. She paused. Dad waits like that too. He says the difference between patience and avoidance is whether you're building something while you wait or just staying still. Marin said nothing for a moment. She looked at the wall. She thought about the sealed reports she had not read. She thought about the investigation her counsel had advised her to leave alone. She thought about 3 years of flying on Meridian 7s to prove something to herself that she had never been able to name precisely enough to examine. She said, "What does your father do while he waits?" "He builds the proof," Nora said simply. "So it survives." She looked at the washer on its cord. "He says the thing you say before you're ready never survives what comes after it." She returned to her book. She gave Marin the last word in the exchange by not needing one. Marin stood. She felt re-angled, the way a room feels when you turn a light on and realize you had been navigating by memory of where the furniture was. She went back toward the terminal. She was thinking about the hand flat on the panel. She was thinking about a sealed report she had not read. Victor Strand arrived at the terminal at 7:15 in a car that cost what most people's annual salaries couldn't reach. He came through the glass doors with his hands in his jacket pockets and the settled confidence of a man who had arranged the furniture of the room before he entered it. And before he spoke, he adjusted the tie pin, a small, deliberate motion, right then left as though placing a period at the end of a sentence only he could read. He saw Cal at the operations desk. "The 23rd is next week," he said, walking toward him at an unhurried pace. Cal did not look up from his documentation. "I know. Lodestar's counsel will proceed on schedule." Strand stopped 4 feet away and picked up the pen from the desk surface. Cal sitting where he'd set it and held it without purpose, the way some people handle objects in rooms where they mean to establish ownership. "You've had more patience with this than it called for. I respect that." Cal set down his tablet. He looked at Strand. When he spoke, it was at the same volume as everything else he said that mattered, which was just below conversation. Strand Aero Holdings, Nevada, registered February 14th. That entity received 4 disbursements from the Meridian 7 composite airframe contract between March and September, 3 years ago. Strand was very still. The material substitution authorization for the aft panel composite production run was processed using credentials belonging to the Meridian 7 project manager. Cal's voice did not change register or speed. The specific substitution is documented in an FA sealed investigation report filed under my designee authorization 18 months ago. The FA Aviation Safety Criminal Investigation Office received the complete evidentiary package 4 months ago. Strand's hand moved toward his tie pin. It stopped. He did not touch it. "The 23rd stands," Cal said. Use whatever time you have. He picked up his tablet and turned back to the operations log. Strand stood at the desk. His hand was at his side. He looked at the pen he was still holding, and he set it down with the careful precision of a person who has run the available calculations and found no favorable result. He turned and walked toward the terminal entrance. His footsteps were measured. He did not turn. The tie pin was untouched. Marin had been at the gate desk 8 feet away. She had heard all of it. She stood in the silence after the doors closed behind Strand, and her hands were still. Then she went to her assistant and asked for the Meridian 7 type certificate and the FA Engineering Designee Authorization records. Now, please. The type certificate listed the lead design engineer, C.A. Reyes, P.E. Designee Authorization 7A, active engineering firm of record, Reyes Aerospace Systems. Chief architect of the composite structural design, load path calculations, every technical decision in the aircraft she had been flying for 3 years. She read it twice. She looked at the printout for 6 minutes. Then she asked where Cal. He was in the hangar. She crossed the tarmac in her cashmere coat and heels, and did not think about her heels once. The hangar was the particular brightness of a space built for precision high bays, clean concrete, the Meridian 7 sitting in its maintenance cradle, with 4 inspection lights on the aft section. Cal was standing below the port aft panel with his tablet at his side, not doing anything, just standing in the industrial quiet, looking at the place where his hand had been that morning. He heard her come in. He didn't turn. She said, "You designed it." "Yes." She stopped 10 feet from him. "The sealed report." "Yes, the composite substitution." He turned then. He looked at her with the same direct attention he gave everything, without performance. The aft panel composite in production lot 7 was substituted with a material that passed static spec and had a documented microfracture propagation rate under cyclic aerodynamic load. I found the substitution in the archived procurement records 18 months after Marcus died. He said her husband's name without hesitation as a fact. The aircraft he was on was Lot 7. She was very... It wasn't a design failure, he said. The design is sound. It was a materials failure. The materials failure was ordered and concealed by the project manager who controlled the procurement authorization. She said, "Strand." Yes, she walked past him and stood under the aircraft and looked at the aft panel clean, sealed, aluminum-skinned composite, doing exactly what it was designed to do. No way to see what had happened to its predecessor, unless you knew what you were looking for and had built the thing yourself. She put one hand flat on the fuselage below the panel, the way she had watched him do on the apron. The metal was cool. The aircraft was completely still. She stood there for a long time. "Why didn't you tell me 18 months ago?" she said. It was not quite a question. "Because the report needed to survive a defense attorney," he said. 18 months wasn't patience. It was evidence. She kept her hand on the airframe. She was looking at the panel above her. When she finally spoke, her voice was level and quiet, and contained something she was allowing to exist without naming it. "How long have you known it wasn't your fault?" 18 months, and you've been carrying the proof since." Yes, she looked at the panel. She looked at him. "Show me everything," she said. Strand moved on Friday. Lodestar Capital Management filed an emergency motion Friday morning for immediate seizure of the collateral on the Reyes note, arguing that the designee's pending regulatory exposure impaired the value of the patent assets. This was fabricated. It was designed to compress the timeline to Monday, before Cal's legal team could respond and before the FA's criminal investigation formalized its charges. The motion was Strand's last piece. Cal's attorney called at 7. He called Marin at 7:04. She had been at her desk since 5, with the complete FA sealed report and the 42-page evidentiary package Cal had assembled, email chain, payment transfers, materials testing waivers, all of them organized around one name and one consistent signature. She called the FA Aviation Safety Criminal Investigation Office at 7:15. She was not their first call of the morning. She was, however, the call that provided the corporate chain of control connecting Strand personally to Lodestar to the procurement substitute assembled by outside counsel with no regulatory conflict of interest. Investigators arrived at Strand's offices at 9:47. The conference room door closed from the outside while he was mid-sentence with his own legal team. He reached for his tie pin. Right, then left. Then his hand dropped. He looked at the door. He looked at the document placed on the table, the sealed FA report, Cal's name on the cover. The lot numbers and substitution dates and propagation rate chart laid out with the precision of something that had been carefully built to survive exactly this moment. He looked at his attorneys. He said something about procedure. One of the investigators said something back that was shorter. Strand's hand was in his lap. It did not move. He was escorted from the building without his coat. Outside, the morning continued. By noon, Lodestar's counsel had filed a withdrawal of the emergency motion pending review of the entity's regulatory standing. The note was in resolution. The 23 patents remained with Reyes Aerospace Systems. Cal was at the workbench at 4 when Marin came into the workshop. She had changed out of the cashmere coat into something and she moved differently in it, less like someone executing a plan, more like someone present in a room. She looked at the drawings on the wall, at the aerospace reference volumes in their use order, at Nora's airplane sketches with their optimistic dimensions. She looked at the Starrett precision tool in its brackets, 40 years old, cast iron worn smooth. She looked at him. "It's a good workshop," she said. "It works," he said. She looked at Nora's sketches for a long moment. Then she turned back to him, and what was on her face was not a simple thing, and he didn't try to name it for her. 1 year later, Nora announced at breakfast in September that she was going to be an aerospace engineer. She held the titanium washer between 2 fingers as a visual aid. She presented her supporting arguments. Cal listened. She finished. He said, "Okay." She put the washer back on its cord and returned to her cereal with the satisfaction of someone who has completed a necessary formality. She had transferred to a school with an engineering elective. Her drawings on the workshop wall were updated, now more technical, with notated dimensions, some of them right. His hands carried the same calluses. The dented helmet had been replaced after Nora said she would feel better, and he had gotten a new one, and she had been right. Reyes Aerospace Systems was running at full capacity. The 23 patents were producing licensing revenue. 3 engineers had been hired in October. There was room for a 4th. Marin's office had its window open in the mornings now. Not different from before in any measurable way, she had always had the window, but open differently. The way a door stands open differently when you know someone might come through it. She came to the workshop on a Tuesday in October. Unannounced, she and Cal stood at the workbench over a composite panel section in testing. And she asked questions she didn't pretend not to have studied for. And he answered them in the 2-clause directness of someone who has learned that the people worth talking to don't need the spaces filled. Nora came in at 3:15. She stopped in the door. She looked at her father. She looked at Marin. She reached up and lifted the titanium washer off its cord. She walked to the workbench without hurrying. She set it down between them exactly equidistant, with the precision she brought to things that mattered, and then she went to the other side of the workshop and opened her homework. She did not look back. She already knew they understood. Some debts aren't owed in money, and some truths can't be rushed into, only built, carefully, until they're ready to hold. If you spent 18 months building proof before you said a word proof that cleared your name and reopened someone else's wound, would you have waited that long? Or would you have forced it earlier, even unfinished? Share this with someone who has ever held a truth carefully enough that it survived. Subscribe, we tell stories like this every week, because they deserve to be heard. Then tell us, how long is too long to wait for the right moment? We read every one.